Welcome to this July 2022 case study class. My name's Kieran Doe. I'm a senior tutor at ACA Masters. When I sat the case study exam myself, I won the ICAW prize for the highest score in the world. Several of my students have also won ICAW prizes for their performance in the case study exam. During this class, I'm going to demonstrate how to approach requirement 1 to ensure that you score full marks. This class has been taken from our case study video course. Full details for the course can be found on the case study page of the ACA Masters website. During the class, you'll also see me refer to our AI analysis document, our pro forma report, and of course, our mock exams, marking keys, and model answers. Along with the video course, these resources can be found on the case study page of the ACA Masters website. You'll also find free samples there as well, both from the video course and also from the materials. So as with the previous mock exam classes, we're going to take each requirement in turn. So starting with requirement 1, a review of the draft management accounts for the current year in comparison with the previous year, as we would expect for requirement 1, as has always been the case in requirement 1. Your review should be based on management accounts as set out in Exhibit 16. So as we would expect, we're going to get the latest set of management accounts in Exhibit 16. It should cover revenue for each product group and in total, cost of sales, gross profit for each product group and in total. So very important that we focus on exactly what the examiner has asked for, as this will enable us to decide where to focus our analysis. You should incorporate in your review the additional information in Exhibit 17. So as we would expect to go with the management accounts, we're going to have some additional information, and this will give us the reasons why certain items have gone up or down in the year. Now you can see it says you should also respond to the request for advice in Exhibit 17. So therefore, in this requirement 1, we do have an additional piece of analysis. If you think back to mock exam 1, we didn't have that there. In mock exam 1, it was revenue, cost of sales, gross profit, but then also an operating profit analysis, and there wasn't that additional one-off issue to have to deal with. Now, as I said in the mock exam 1 debrief class, in the last 2 exams, there hasn't been a one-off piece of analysis in the July exam, so in 21 and 2020. However, that's not to say there couldn't be one. There absolutely could be. There was in November 21. So there might be a one-off piece of analysis in requirement 1, there might not be. So you absolutely need to be prepared for both. And as we'll see, it doesn't make too much difference in terms of our exam approach here. So once you've looked at what you have to do, you can already start to think about what the marking key might look like, because that's what I like to do, because then that helps me decide where I'm going to focus. What are my sections going to be in my report? Because we know that this column will stay the same, as will this column. So we're really kind of deciding what are these 6 boxes going to be on the marking key. And actually, when you do have the one-off piece of analysis, it makes things a little bit easier, because this will almost always be 2 boxes. So therefore, we usually have 2 boxes here. It could possibly just be 1 if it was quite a small issue to have to deal with. But here, we'll probably assume it's going to be 2, unless when we look at it, we think it is kind of really small and there's kind of more to do here. Now, because we also have to look at revenue, and then we've got cost of sales and gross profit. So therefore, we'll absolutely assume that revenue is going to be 2 boxes, as is usually the case. There are occasions when it has been 4 boxes, or certainly one occasion where it has been 4 boxes, but it was kind of a lot to do. There's a lot of information on revenue there as well. There wasn't a one-off piece of analysis. So that meant there were kind of like more boxes up for grabs. And therefore, that's why 4 boxes were allocated to revenue. There was more to do on revenue, and there wasn't a one-off issue. And therefore, we'll have 2 boxes for cost of sales and gross profit. So obviously, we did the same thing with mock exam 1 at the start, looked at the requirement and then thought about what this might look like on the marking key, because this will enable you to decide one, what your sections will be, but how much to have under each section. And that's really important, because you don't want to be kind of like incorrectly weighted in your analysis. If you thought revenue was 4 boxes and you have kind of too much on it, but then you don't have enough on some of these other issues. So I can appreciate that it isn't always entirely obvious, but try to think about what this might look like on the marking key, because it will give you a steer as to how much to have for each section. And of course, we've seen this in the mock exams, and we'll see this in later mock exam as well. So therefore, clearly they are our sections for our report. So we're going to have revenue. Cost of sales kind of goes with gross profit. It's difficult to analyze gross profit without looking at cost of sales. So we've got our gross profit slash cost of sales section here. And then we're obviously going to have a section. So we're not going to have operating profit, because we haven't been asked for that. But then we're going to have that additional piece of analysis, and we'll just call that request for advice, or whatever the issue is. And then we'll have our conclusions, and then we'll have our recommendations. So very useful to do that at the start, just to have a think through what exactly you're being asked for, and therefore what your sections will be on your report, and have a think about the marking key, so you can kind of think about how much to have for each section. But don't overly worry about it kind of too much. As long as you answer everything, you would have attempted everything, and there might be a little bit of uncertainty, like might this only be 1 box, particularly if there's operating profit in there as well. You might think there's operating profit kind of going here, or is this only 1 box? So again, don't overly think it, but just have some awareness of the marking key. But, attempt everything, and you should be fine on requirement 1. Remember, the hardest thing on requirement 1 is often restricting yourself, not writing too much, not spending too much time on requirement 1. That's probably the most difficult thing with requirement 1, like restraining yourself and holding yourself back, because there's lots of analysis that you could do, and there's probably lots of things that you've thought about in advance of the exam that you'd like to include in your answer. But just remember, you can't produce all of this analysis. You need to be selective on where to focus, and that's really the key skill in requirement 1. And certainly probably the things that most students find hardest is being kind of restricting yourself and only having the points you need to get the marks you need, and then moving on within time, so that requirement 2 and requirement 3 don't suffer. Remember, you have to pass each requirement. So then, as we would expect, of course, we're going to get the latest set of accounts, and then we're also going to have some information on things which have happened during the year. So as we would expect, we've got a breakdown by each product group. So we've got the note from the finance director shortly before the exam date, giving us some additional information. Here's some additional information that will help you with your analysis. So we have a breakdown of each product group by product, by licensor, and of course, jigsaw puzzles doesn't have a breakdown of individual items. We're also told sales volumes as well. So this is presented in a slightly different format from mock exam 1, but nonetheless the same information is there, and therefore we can do the same analysis, which we've thought about a lot in advance of the exam. So we know that those will be going into our numbers. So we can see here that we've got some information on each product group, and then we've got the request for a device. So I'm going to deal with this separately when I come onto that part. I'm going to ignore it for now. You might decide you want to have a brief skim through it, but it can be dealt with in isolation, or certainly that has been the case in all recent case study exams, and we're not expecting a change there. So now I'm going to look through here, see what's happened in a year to give me my reasons as to why certain items have gone up or down. So as I explained in the mock exam 1 class, you may decide that you want to calculate the numbers first and then read a narrative and decide how you're going to use it. Or you could kind of read the narrative first and then do the numbers. I think either way works. It really does come down to preference. Personally, I like to have a kind of quick look through because it will give me an idea of what's happened in the year. And I can start to think about, where this information is going to fit into my analysis. And then when I do the numbers, sometimes I'll so for example, if we're told a particular product's done well, then when I do the numbers, I see it shot up and I think, okay, that kind of, makes sense. But you could do it the other way around. It would work, just as well the other way around, I think. So we're told that shortly before the busy Christmas period, we released several expansion packs for Lamfo. So of course we knew from the AI that heritage board games haven't been doing particularly well, and they definitely needed refreshing. So it sounds like they've actually done something about this during the year. They all received favourable reviews, so we'd expect them to have done well from online bloggers and trade magazines, resulting in increased interest in Lamfo. So that sounds as though that would have gone up when I look at that. So I'm thinking, where does that go? Well, that obviously goes under my HBG analysis. And that's going to be a reason there. So if I'm thinking about, what am I going to have as my revenue section? Well, we need to do it by product group. So we're going to have overall revenue, HBG, LBG, jigsaw puzzles, of course, and then you could look at mix by product group. So we weren't asked in the requirement to look at it by channel, but I would probably still have something by channel. I think that's quite interesting. So if you've got time, you could do mix by product group, but if not, I'd probably do it by channel. You could do it by both if you've got enough time, but then we've kind of got 6 points of revenue, which is quite a lot if we're saying it's just one box. Now in the previous mock exam, we were asked to comment on by channel as well. So therefore we had some detailed analysis on retailer and online, but maybe here we'll just focus on the mix, but absolutely overall and by each product group, because that is exactly what the requirement asked for. So this is giving me a reason why HBG would have gone up. So we go number, reason. There might be a reason why HBG has gone up in total, or as part of that analysis, we'll have some numbers on an individual product. So you might want to just kind of scribble, by the side here, Lamfo, because that's where you're going to use this piece of information. Remember the golden rule: we want to use the exam paper information as much as we can to generate points for our answer. So we also launched 2 special editions of Mucho. So we've got 2 special editions there. A Christmas edition was released in November 21 and a British Royal Family edition in May 22. So might not have seen quite as much benefit of that, although I guess that would have been quite seasonal. And then we've got the Christmas edition here. So 2 special editions, both are accompanied by substantial marketing campaigns. So maybe that's a reason why promotion costs have gone up, but we're not going to be looking at that because we're not looking at operating profit. But again, if it's done well, then that would be a reason why HBG has gone up. So you might want to kind of scribble to the side of there, Mucho 2x special editions, just something to remind you there. It's going to be something you're going to look at when you look at heritage board games. The increase in sales volume meant that production costs per unit reduced. So production costs per unit reduced. So therefore that's going to have obviously an impact on cost of sales, but you're really going to see that in the margin because if the unit price is reducing, but volumes are going up, then therefore we're going to see that in the gross profit margin. So again, you might want to scribble that that's under HBG, so presumably it relates to HBG. So you might want to kind of scribble that down next to here. And we'll think about gross profit when we get to that. So LBG, the release of Armando football game in February 22 was overshadowed by Hamlin's release of Armando football game in March 22. So of course we know from the AI that this license is non-exclusive, and we identified that as a potential risk, as a potential issue. And we do actually know that someone else has the right to produce Mondo products, and including a board game. So many players could not distinguish between the two games. So there's like a rival game, which is also a Mondo football game. So you can kind of understand why players, so consumers, cannot distinguish between the two, so opted for the lower priced Hamlin game. We were not aware that Mondo also had a licensing agreement with Hamlin, and despite substantial time being spent trying to rectify the issue, Mondo refused to remove the Hamlin game from sale. So this is going to be a reason clearly why Mondo sales are going to be lower, or perhaps haven't increased by as much. And we're also told that substantial time was spent trying to rectify the issue. So if you think back to the AI analysis class, of course, we said there that those costs, license negotiations, would be in here. So that might be a reason why head office costs have increased, or certainly why LBG gross profit margin may have fallen. So again, you could scribble that down there next to LBG gross profit. There's those increased costs there. Maybe next to here, like the licensing fee as well. Maybe that would be an impact there because Mondo, of course, had a lower fee. And then, of course, that's like the reason why revenue in LBG may be lower, or certainly for that particular licensor. The Alien Overflow strategy game was released as planned, and sales exceeded expectations. So that sounds quite positive there. Of course, we know Alien Overflow, that is, of course, feeding in to Ringover, and that game was expected to be launched. So again, that could, that's going to come under LBG as well. So again, you've got Mondo, you've got Ringover as well. And then we've got Jigsaw Puzzles. We experienced significant delays and missed deadlines on supplies from PZ. So there's been issues with PZ in the past, as we knew from the AI. So delays, missed deadlines. As a result, we were unable to supply our retailers with certain types of Jigsaw Puzzle at various points in the year. So gesture of goodwill, we offered extended discounts to affected retailer customers. So there's been delays, missed deadlines, unable to supply retailers with certain types of Jigsaw Puzzle. So therefore, it could be that Jigsaw Puzzle's revenue has gone down, and presumably they didn't have the puzzles for their own online sales as well. And then they've extended discounts to affected retailer customers. So again, that's going to erode the gross profit margin because they're going to be selling those items for less, and we're not told they got any compensation from PZ or able to get them at a lower price from PZ as a result. So that's going to cause the gross profit margin to go down there. So again, you can kind of see how you've got some reasons for each of the individual product groups why their individual gross profit margins may have gone down. There's the issue here, of course, so you could just jot there PZ, LBG. We could think about what there might be a reason there, the extensive negotiations on the trying to rectify the Hamlin issue, and then HBG, and that sounded positive because there were some economies of scale, lower production costs. So you can see here, already with gross profit, we haven't actually quite thought about how we'd lay this out yet, because we could look at the individual costs as well. We'll come on to that when we look at gross profit. But just as you read through it, you might want to just kind of jot those down. So you've kind of thought how you're going to use all of this information, which is, as we've covered in the previous class, is absolutely what you should be trying to do in your answer. It's very rare there's a piece of information included from the examiner that is of just no significance whatsoever. Almost all of the points can be used to generate a point for your answer, which will then feed onto the marking key. So then we kind of thought about what our approach would look like, and then we can look at the numbers for the year. So of course, we thought about this in great detail. You've got the AI analysis here. So I think the main point comes from just thinking about which point you're going to have, where you're going to focus. And of course, I've decided, 5 points for revenue because it's 2 boxes, kind of 5 points for gross profit. And then we've got the one-off piece of analysis as well. So when I do the numbers, I actually like to do revenue, do the numbers for revenue, and then write up my revenue section and go back and do the gross profit numbers. Other people, and it's equally fine to do this, like to do all of the numbers, and then they've kind of done all of the numbers and then write it up. The reason I like to do it like that is just because I've kind of got revenue on my mind. I do the revenue numbers, I look at how they're moving as I go. Then I've kind of got, my revenue reasons that I've already thought about. And as soon as I've done the numbers, I then type it up because, revenue is kind of quite fresh in my head because I've just done the numbers for it. And then I immediately kind of, write it up. I find it a bit easier to do that. My mind is just focused on revenue. And then I'll do gross profit, so numbers, and then the write up. Otherwise, you do kind of jump around a little bit because you're going to do the revenue and the gross profit numbers and then come back to revenue. I guess it kind of depends on, what approach works for you. So I do the revenue numbers first of all. So of course, breaking it down by product group, and then we would have it in total, of course. And of course, you can look at the individual products and license orders for LBG, and you've got the volume as well, so we can break it out between volume and average price per unit. And then I'd look at mix probably by value. It can be done by volume and value, but if you're constrained on time, I'd just do one of them, probably value. And then we can look at it by channel as well. So kind of quite a lot to get through, but I think once you've practiced a few mock exams, and you've obviously been through the AI analysis and been through the AI in a lot of detail, you may even know some of the prior year numbers off by heart. Personally, I'd probably still double check it, because if you got the 3 and the 6 the wrong way around or something like that, which would be quite easy to do, and then it's going to have a knock-on impact on the rest of your analysis, and could cause your subsequent analysis to be wrong. So I'd lay it out, I'd put the prior year numbers in, and then I'd put the current year numbers in. I always kind of quite like doing this in the exam. It was, having spent so much time doing, mock exams and wondering, I wonder whether, Mucho's going to go up or go down, and, are they all going to go down again? And, therefore I can make, this point, is LBG going to have a good year or a bad year? It has been slightly variable in the past. So when you actually get the actual numbers, it's kind of quite nice. So kind of like, oh, so this is actually what happened. But then you can go through and put in the numbers. Now, always just sense check them. Obviously you have a formula here and a formula here, and you can drag them down, do the working, of course, in the spreadsheet area, and then copy it over to the word processing area. So you'd have this in the spreadsheet area and you can drag it down, but I would just sense check the numbers, because if you did something like a mix and you calculated mix as obviously this divided by this, but then because you wanted to drag it down, you lock this cell and then you kind of pull the formula across here, it would take this number divided by this, because you would have locked that. So therefore you could see how you could by dragging a formula, it could possibly cause like an error in there. So just make sure you kind of sense check everything, double check everything, and make sure it looks right. But we can see here, so as I'm going through this analysis, I'm thinking, okay, so Mucho's gone up by 10%. Of course, I knew the reason for that, because I've kind of got that here because of those special editions that were released. And Zincs has gone down, so that's a poor performance. We weren't told anything about that, but Lamp has gone up, and we were told about that. Expansion packs, we've got a reason there. So I'm definitely going to focus on these two. Now, I always like to focus on areas where the examiner's given me some information, which they have here, and also where the numbers been a significant movement. Either or, so either the number's really significant or the examiner's told me something about it. If both, then I'm absolutely going to have that in my analysis. Others gone up quite significantly. Again, it would be kind of nice to talk about that, but then, like I said, you also have to like restrain yourself a bit. We could talk, a lot about every number and then just run out of time and, do everything, a full analysis of all the management accounts, but then just fail on requirement 2 or 3. So you have to, restrict yourself as well. So I'll probably focus on those two. I might make a brief comment on other if I have time. You could look at the mix, by product group. If you didn't have time, maybe decide I'm not going to have time for that. I'm not going to calculate it. That would be absolutely fine. If you do struggle with time on requirement 1 and you've looked at it and there's 5 points on revenue and you've got some information here, then again, that's probably something you could, miss out. Or quickly calculate numbers and see they're not significant and then, move on. I mean, it wouldn't take long to calculate them, but if you do really struggle with time and you're looking at revenue and there's kind of 5 points and you've got enough to say anyway, then you could possibly miss it out. I would look at, the volume and is it due to a price increase, an average price revenue per unit increase or volume increase. So you can see volume's gone up quite a lot here. Price has gone up slightly. And then we've got LBGs. When we go through those numbers, as you can see, Mondo's gone down significantly. We're definitely going to talk about that. Clown House has gone up really significantly. We weren't told much about that, but that has done well in recent periods. That's a key driver of revenue growth. So I wouldn't say it's that surprising, but that really is quite a significant movement. So again, ideally, I'd like to comment on that, but I'd probably focus on mentioning Mondo. And I want to mention Ringover as well, because I've got a reason in the exam paper. I could see how you might be torn between, should I mention Ringover or Clown House? Well, Clown House has got a significant movement, but nothing mentioned in the exam paper. Ringover has a less significant movement, but it's mentioned in the exam paper. So, ideally comment on both, but if you don't have time, then, just mention one. We'll look at the marking key and, again, just remind you that you don't have to get every single point. I wouldn't necessarily go as far as saying it's almost like a trap, but it is in a way, because there's a skill in restricting yourself, and you will get punished if you do too much in requirement 1, because you'll get punished on requirement 2 and requirement 3. So you do have to restrict yourself, as I keep saying. And then again, you can see here that the price has gone down, and actually we knew from the AI, you should be comfortable with this point by now, but Mondo products are higher value. So that would kind of make sense there. I'll probably comment on that. JP, significant decline, but we of course know why that is, because of the supply issues. And then the total revenue, key numbers to focus on here, of course, is they've met the target, they've exceeded the target. So that's really good, and that's going to go in our analysis there. And again, we can do volume and average price. So if you really do struggle, maybe you could not have like the mix by each product, particularly if you've got enough for each reason here and you don't think revenue is 4 boxes. You could have slightly less analysis there. You could possibly, if you really, really struggle, not have the breakdown of volume and price per product group. But yeah, I think you can do it in the time. So ideally, you would have that in there. And then, of course, we could look at the mix. As you'd expect, it's moved towards HBG because the volume shift has been quite significant there. And LBG, actually, the price difference now is actually smaller than it was. Obviously, there's been a decline here and an increase here. And then we've got the channel. So you can see retailers have continued to decline. Online has continued to increase, and online is really increasing its share there. So you'd expect that to have a positive impact on the margin. Remember, these sales at a higher profit margin because there isn't the retailer discount. Although we do know the discount has gone up slightly on jigsaw puzzles. So you can kind of see the numbers there. We've already kind of decided what we're going to focus on. You've got the pro forma report here. So you've got your plan here already. You just needed to kind of think about where firstly, which areas are you going to focus on, so in revenue, which sections, which many paragraphs are you going to have, and then also where your various reasons are going to slot in. So we've already thought about that. We've got our 5 mini paragraphs or 5 or 6 mini paragraphs on revenue if we have time, and we've already thought about where all our reasons are going to go. So of course, with overall revenue, we'd give the headline number as well as a percentage increase. And then we're going to say, has it exceeded the target? Is it a good or poor performance in the context of the market? I'd mentioned the other context point about disposable incomes and the fragility of the UK economy, and compare the growth to the previous year, and then look at whether it's due to volume or whether it is due to price. So quite a bit of analysis there with overall revenue. Just remember, with overall revenue, you're not going to go into the detailed reasons why every product group has gone up or down, because we're going to do that here. So we're not going to say overall revenue has gone up because HPG went up because mutuo sales went up, because you're going to talk about HPG going up and mutuo sales going up here. So we're kind of looking at just kind of like high level trends here. So we'll be saying things like it's due to a change in volume or a change in price on the total numbers. All product groups, all channels have seen an increase. All product groups and all channels have seen an increase. Looking at the performance compared to the target, looking at it compared to the industry, looking at it in the context of the economy, looking at it compared to the previous year. So kind of like high level analysis there. So I'd definitely type that bit up in the answer first of all, and clearly it was above the target. This is a good performance. It definitely is a good performance. Revenue's gone up by 6.1%. But remember, the games and jigsaws market or kind of subcategory has continued to do well despite the expected industry decline. Again, there's that context point about the economy, and then just picking up it's due to volume and average price. We can't say it's due to an increase in all product groups because jigsaws, of course, went down. So then, as we had on our plan, we're just going to go through each channel, say number, up or down. Always give an opinion. Is it impressive? Is it incredible? Perhaps is it disappointing? Number, reason, and then the reason might be a specific reason given in the example in the narrative, like in the text, as we have here. But it might come from the numbers. It might come from breaking or analysing those numbers down. Remember, the examiner's kind of given us two types of information here. Numerical information, which is financial, other numerical information, and then of course some narrative, some textual information here. So we're trying to use all of it. So you could, as you've said, explain the increase in HPG by looking at the individual products. And then we're going to have like a trend point, further analysis point. So is it due to volume or growth? Or looking at points like, has revenue from the three main products continue to decrease? Because that was a trend that we noticed in the AI analysis class. The three main products have continued to decrease. That would be a good point to mention there as a trend point as well. So, as I said before, number and reason is the easy bit. This is perhaps, a slightly trickier bit. And then you can have a context point as well. So you can see here, HPG increase, number, as we said, kind of said incredibly there. It's quite impressive. And then the reason is because there was this increase in LAMFO because of the expansion packs, this increase in Mucho because of the special editions. And then we'd said here, as our further insight point, this reverses the recent decline in Mucho and LAMFO, although Zincs is still performing poorly. So you've kind of got two going up and one still going down. It didn't sound as though anything had been done about that product, but they had about the other two. And then you can say whether it's due to volume or average price, and then have a context point. I remember, as we've covered in all of the previous classes, as I've said, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to say HPG number up. So we get a point here. You get that for being in the appendix anyway, but number up. With our reason, which we've got here, you could have had either of those reasons, but we got both. And then a further insight point, we said Zincs hasn't performed well. You can see I haven't mentioned that. I don't think I said weak performer, but I use an equivalent phrase. Zincs is still performing poorly. That's equivalent to saying it's a weak performer. Even if you said Zincs hasn't done well, you'd still pick up that mark there. It doesn't have to be exact word for word, but as long as you have made that point. Like I said, if there was more time, it would have been nice to comment on other, but that didn't matter. We could have mentioned that there. And then a context point as well. we said here, I think we did more of that with the overall revenue. We did mention a point here for HBG, but it doesn't look as though HBG games are heritage board games are cheaper than LBG. Wasn't mentioned there, mate. It might be mentioned perhaps in the growth profit section. And of course, we did our overall revenue, so overall revenue up. And you can see here, comparing it to the prior year growth, have they met the target? So you can see I mentioned the target and I mentioned comparing it to the industry decline, but that was a backslash. And sometimes a backslash is really nice because you've got more chance of getting the point. So it's kind of nice in that regard. But when you get them both, sometimes it can be a bit frustrating because you're obviously only going to get credit for it once, but that's just the way that it goes with case. Growth due to volume and price, we mentioned that. Could have said it had declined without HBG. So you can see here quite a few points we've picked up there. We've actually picked up most of these points. And then we just go through each of, the others. So number, reason, as we've said. So CH growth offsetting the decline of Mondo, ring over up as well. So quite a few reasons we picked up. There were quite a lot of reasons there. But you can see, so again, LBG, number, reason. And then our further insight point, we said revenue would have declined without CH. So it's important that that license is renewed. So that, again, that's another good kind of further insight trend point to look at. The number and the reasons are quite easy. These further insight points tend to be a bit more challenging. So you could have said actually without CH, if you stripped out that growth, LBG would have gone down. So that's quite interesting how kind of dependent it is on CH. You could have possibly have mentioned the mix as well to have mentioned, increased dependency on CH, or CH is, propping up the product group. So again, there we've got it there. And then I think we looked at average price and volume as well, because I thought that's another good possible point as a further insight point, is the increased use of volume or price. And we said it was due to volume and average price had gone down because Mondo products are higher value, and Mondo as a share of total revenue for the LBG group has now, of course, declined. So that was another point there. So actually did really well here, picked up all of those. But again, you can see it almost, I've almost got too much really, because once I got to 4 points, I'd already maxed out the marks. So you can see, what I meant when I was saying you do have to kind of restrict yourself a bit. I would have, in an ideal world, I would have known when I've got to 4 and then wouldn't have included the other points because they haven't got me any more marks. But obviously answering the exam, I didn't know. So, best to have a few more if you can. A bit of margin of safety, because you can, I may have made a good point and it wouldn't have been on here, and you'll see some of the points I've made aren't on here. And then just the same thing with JP. So then you just go through them as we did, mock exam 1, JP, number, reason, did mention a further insight point. And of course, we mentioned these context points as we go as well. So the industry performance, we've picked up that one. We've mentioned the target as well, so we picked up that one. So we've mentioned a few of the context points as we've gone by kind of having them at the end. So you can see here with JP mentioned this context point that sophisticated puzzles are popular with consumers. It's hard to really find that many other JP points. But yeah, that wasn't on there. And then we looked at mix as well. You could have looked at product mix, product group mix, or you could have looked at channel mix. Looked at channel because we haven't looked at anything on channel yet. And there's a few good points you could mention here. The trend is not expected to reverse, a couple of context points. And then you could put COVID in there as well, mentioning that, in the industry, a third of toys and games are sold online. You could have mentioned that FFL is now kind of higher than the industry typical figure. So yeah, you could have had mix. You can do mix other ways. I think they'll be quite flexible here because there's different ways you can look at mix. But then, looking at it by channel. And then picked up some context point. It's difficult to say whether, COVID will still be on the marking key or not. Yeah, it definitely is having some impact still, and definitely has had an impact, as we mentioned there. So, perhaps maybe talking about the impact COVID has had in perhaps, more of a past tense, might be more relevant. At some point, it won't be on the marking key anymore, but I think until we know for sure, I think better to include it, better to have it on there. Whether it is worth a mark or, not worth a mark, then, not having it on there. Because if you don't have it on there and then it is worth a mark, that's obviously worse than having it on there and it's not worth a mark. So you can see how you'd have dealt with that revenue section in that mock exam. Obviously in the other mock exams, we'll see different scenarios where there's more information, on certain areas, or the requirement is worded slightly differently. So of course, you tailor this depending on what the requirement has asked for. So, it might be more, we might have a detailed revenue analysis by product. We might have more on the individual channels in, different exams. So we'll see more examples of those. Obviously, this was a bit different from mock exam 1. So then we could come on to gross profit. And again, we can go through, calculate the numbers. So I would look at, just as we did in the AI class and just as we did in mock exam 1, I would look at it by cost area and then gross profit by each channel. You could do cost of sales by each product group as well. So sorry, cost area and gross profit by product group. You could do cost of sales by each product group as well. But I think if you're looking at gross profit by product group, you're going to pick most of it up there, because remember, we're going to focus on the margin. And therefore, you're going to pick up, have there been significant movements in cost of sales when you look at the margin. So I personally would do, because obviously, you want to kind of save as much time as possible with Appendix 1 whilst calculating everything you need. I look at cost area, cost of sales by cost area, look at it, each of those costs as a percentage of revenue, doing license fees as a percentage of LBG, because it only relates to LBG revenue. And then gross profit, absolutely calculate the absolute numbers, but focusing on that, margin as well. But again, we've got a bit of a tricky, decision to make here, because we've said, cost of sales / gross profit is, one box on the marking key. So we only kind of need like 4 or 5 points. But then, you're thinking, well, look at cost of sales overall, there's manufacturing production, there's head office overheads, there's license fees. And then I can look at, overall gross profit, by each, product group. Again, that's 8 points. That's, too much. So again, you need to think kind of selectively, where are you going to focus here? So we weren't really told in the exam paper, unlike, the other in mock exam 1, where we were told specific information about certain types of costs, like why manufacturing production had gone up because they had to switch suppliers in the year. If we were told something about head office costs, we're not really told much about the individual costs here. And if you look at the numbers as well, remember I said, have you been told information in the exam paper, or is the number particularly significant, so that it's worth commenting on? Head office overheads, are boring. They've moved by like a tiny amount. They have decreased as a percentage of revenue, kind of, which is good. But we're going to talk about overall cost of sales anyway. They're a small cost. They're not that significant. So I wouldn't comment on that. We know there's a lot to talk about of gross profit. We can see that the margin's gone up here quite significantly. We can see overall, the gross profit margin has improved. So that's our headline number. We're absolutely going to be talking about that, regardless. But actually, there's kind of a lot to say by product group, because this is increased and we're given a reason from the exam paper. This is decreased, again, reason on the exam paper, as is this, reason on the exam paper. So I'm definitely going to want to look at gross profit by each product group in this exam. Not always the case, as we've seen in some of the other exams. There wasn't as much to comment on when looking at it by each product group. So then I'd probably be tempted to still comment on manufacture and production because it's the biggest cost. We can see it has declined as a percentage of revenue, so that's definitely kind of feeding in, to the gross profit improvement. So again, you kind of have to think quite carefully, but I think in this exam, I think this is kind of nice to comment on this. I would have commented on an overall cost of sales, absolutely, because the requirement did ask, specifically said cost of sales. So you need the main headline number there, overall cost of sales. I'd probably focus on this cost of sales, overall GP, and then each GP by product in this case, because there wasn't like a particular reason here, unless you mentioned PZ, but that's a reason why cost of sales, it could be a reason kind of why they've gone down, but not as a percentage of revenue. So that didn't really help kind of too much there. I wouldn't have this. I'd be tempted to maybe mention something about license fees as well, because we do know, of course, that revenue mix has moved away from Mondo and it had a lower fee, so that could result in the fee going up as a percentage of revenue, and we can see that happening there. So that is kind of quite interesting to look at. But again, I've kind of got that dilemma of I need to kind of like restrict myself because I don't want to waste too much time. So, as an absolute, I definitely look at cost of sales, gross profit, certainly by a couple of channels, individual product groups, rather than channels. Definitely looking at gross profit by a couple of individual product groups. Ideally all of them if I've got time. And then maybe I could comment on a couple of these. So you can see in the model answer, maybe you could say here that we've kind of got a bit too much, and we'll see that when we look at the marking key. But look at overall cost of sales, and as with total revenue, we're just going to make like a high level comment. We're not going to kind of go into the detail of each cost, explaining it in detail. Just say whether they've gone up faster or slower than revenue, and therefore what impact that would have on the gross profit margin. And then, if you look at overall gross profit, this is where the really interesting bits are, because you can look at, yes, it's gone up, which is good, but then focus on that margin. There's been a significant increase in the gross profit margin from this to this. And then what's our reasons? And we thought about these a lot in the AI analysis class when I explained all of these in great detail. There's lots of reasons here why the gross profit margin might improve or decline. So the main ones, in this exam, of course, is that there's been a gross profit increase in HGB, as we can see, Heritage Board Games, gross profit has gone up, significantly, and that's more than outweighed the decline in the other two. And also, we know this is higher profit margin, and revenue mix has shifted towards HBG. So more sales are at a higher margin, and therefore that's improving the profit margin. And then the margin itself is also improving. So almost kind of double upside there. The margin itself is improving and revenue is moving towards that. So more sales are HGB sales. And then we also know, if we look at it by channel, shifting towards online, which is also higher margin. So there's kind of a lot going on here to improve the profit margin. Quite different from mock exam 1, of course. So then we'd have that in our gross profit analysis. So the increase in HGB offsetting the other two, revenue mix shift towards HGB and online sales, which are of course higher margin. And then a context point. So you could mention it started to recover. We said something different, of course, in requirement 1. We said a continued decline is concerning. And we mentioned his context point of margins being like a wider industry issue. And then you could look at it, by channel as well. Again, similar thing, the absolute number, the increase in the margin. If you struggled with time, maybe you could just focus on the margin, because it tends to be that they're kind of happy with you having a margin or the absolute number. I think with total numbers like overall gross profit, overall cost of sales, overall revenue, I like to have like the absolute number in there, because I kind of feel like that's a headline number, overall revenue, overall gross profit, overall cost of sales. So I still like to have the 2022 number in there, even though it's not on there. Maybe it's just a bit of a personal thing, and I can see from an exam point of view how you could argue that you don't necessarily need to have that in there, and that's fine if you decide to take that approach. But I feel in a real report that you probably would. But anyway, so here we could say, so you could say HGB, you could just focus on the margin, as I've just said, and then the reason. So there was a reduction in production cost per unit, as we were told on the exam paper, and then a context point that continues to be the highest margin group. But again, we kind of thought about some of these points prior to the exam, and then you can do the same thing with the other two as well. So the reason from the exam paper. So LBG, gross profit margin has gone down because there's been an increase in license negotiation costs. So cost of sales, have gone up there in terms of those costs. But, revenue won't have changed. That was just a cost which didn't generate any additional revenue. Continued decline is concerning and unsustainable, and it continues to be the lowest margin product group due to the licensing fees. And then JP, again, due to the increased discounts following the PZ production issue. So you can see here how, just like with revenue, we've got the reasons, from the exam paper. That's another reason why I focused here, because I had good reasons from the exam paper. I'm trying to use this exam paper information as much as possible. So I'm going to focus on the numbers where I can, use those reasons. But again, it would be good to kind of comment on a few individual cost of sales lines. Definitely if you're given more information in the exam paper, why they've moved, or if there's been a significant movement, then comment on them. But again, you can see it's a bit of a balancing act here as well. But again, with the license fees, you could have the number, the reason because of that revenue mix shift, and then the context point there as well. So then, very similar exam technique. So, same thing really. And you can see with the marking key here, we do have a bit of flexibility, a bit of leeway, because you could have done overall cost of sales, or you could have done it by the product groups. You could have looked at, just gross profit, or you could have looked at some of the individual costs as well. So I think either way, if you did just look at the costs, or you did just look at the gross profit, you could have still got to, enough points here. This is generally quite easy. It's for the numbers, and then this is the reasons and the further insight points about why the profit margin has changed. You've got it here for each product group as well. So clearly there as well, would have picked up clearly competent in each there. Mentioned some of these context points, mentioned this with the licensing rates there. Could have mentioned a specific point about her Hamlin as well. So we've got those points there. So then we were told about this additional piece of analysis. So of course we didn't have this in mock exam 1. So we're told about a customer who is in financial difficulty. So this does relate back to the AI, because of course we were told in the AI that there was an issue with a customer who experienced cash flow difficulties, but then resumed regular payment. So this issue itself, was quite similar. So in financial difficulties, it was Checkmate, who we knew about from the AI. Payments had been several months late, back in March. So the managing director, Rodney, who we actually were told about, the chess champion, was he told FFL that there were some temporary cash flow issues, and then payments would resume within the next few months. However, when we've got to June, we were informed that Checkmate was undergoing a restructuring to prevent the business from collapse. So, it looks like things are quite dire there. As a result of the restructuring, FFL would need to write off 35% of the 820k balance owing from Checkmate. The firm managing the restructuring informed us that Checkmate has struggled in recent years due to an unexpected shift towards online sales. Checkmate does not have an online presence currently, but as part of the restructuring plan, they will close 4 of its physical retail sites and launch a website with full e-commerce functionality. This will enable Checkmate to return to profitability, settle the remaining balance, and continue in business for the foreseeable future. So as part of this restructuring, FFL are being asked to write off 35% of what is owed to them from Checkmate. So the FFL board would like you to identify the issues that FFL should consider and explain the impact on the management accounts. So hopefully you're quite comfortable with what writing off a receivable would involve. Obviously, credit the receivable and debit the P&L. You don't have to explain journal entry here. We just need to explain the impact on the accounts, which would of course reduce profit. So these issues can be quite different depending on exactly what's come up. Kind of good things to do would be to calculate any numbers that you've been asked for, of course. So you could perhaps focus on the impacts on the accounts first of all, but also have some narrative points. How significant is it? Even if you aren't specifically asked to say the impact on the accounts, and think about the impact on the accounts. Kind of what's the overall impact on the business? Could you be skeptical of some of the information? Perhaps. So the calculation wasn't too difficult to do. This is a receivable. This is how much is being written off. You could look at this as a percentage of the receivables balance. This is the operating profit, as it currently is. So I guess, you might have thought, would that be written off in gross profit? It probably would go under admin expenses here, but either way, it's going to impact the operating profit, whether it goes into admin or if it were to go into cost of sales. I think probably more likely a bad debt write-off, would go into here. But either way, it's going to impact the operating profit. So you can see the impact it would have. That brings it below the 2 million target here. You could also possibly have looked at, receivables days, as we discussed in the AI class, and calculated that as a percentage of retailer revenue, trade receivables over retailer revenue, because you can see that receivables have gone up even though retailer sales have gone down, and it's only retailers who are giving credit terms. So we notice this in the AI, and that's kind of quite unusual that receivables are going up but retailer sales are going down, and you can see this in the receivables days, and it's now beyond what the normal credit terms are. So of course, don't, again, you think about your overall exam technique here, because it's tempting to think, I need to do really well here. And you absolutely need to answer this part of the requirement. You need to answer everything the examiner's asked you for, or the client's asked you for in the report. But just remember, if you've done what we've done here, and have already got, past all of these boxes, really comfortably, then of course, we want to avoid getting a not attempted. But actually, if you've already done all of these, even if you didn't do as well here, and you ended up getting, maybe an IC, maybe even an ID in one of them, do your conclusions, do your recommendations, even if you've got a few there, you can still see here, you would do really well overall on requirement 1. So it's not essential to pass it, assuming you've done well on the basic bit, the financial statement analysis, the performance analysis. So of course, calculate the numbers that you've been asked for, as we've done, and we can explain that, writing off the receivable would reduce, receivables and operating profit. This will cause operating profit to fall below the target. Possibly should have said, what the operating profit, the revised operating profit, would be. That might be useful. But we can see trade receivables have increased significantly despite revenue from retailers declining. And we looked at the receivables days, it's far in excess of the payment terms. And this shows that, other retailers are behind on payments, and further receivables, may be impaired. So we've kind of calculated, the numbers there, identified, other issues, the impact on the accounts, but identified other issues as well for the business. So, but, just remember as well, if you think about kind of the overall issue here, we know from the AI that Checkmate, isn't, the biggest of the retail customers, of the ones that we're told is actually the smallest, but it is still significant. So it is still significant at 3% of revenue. If they went out of business, it'd have a significant impact on FFL. So it probably is in FFL's incentive, to keep them going. I mean, you could have worked out what the revenue is worth every year, perhaps. But again, we don't want to do too much analysis here. I mean, knew some points from the AI. It's been a challenging period for retailers. We knew that another customer had experienced difficulties, and they actually resumed payments. So there is some hope here, actually, that Checkmate, this reasonably important customer, could continue. So probably try to have kind of like four points here would be about right, 4 to 6, I would say, and then a few recommendations as well. So inspect the recovery plan, perhaps, and only write it off if they are actually going to survive. Review other receivables, enforce payment dates. Maybe offer a deferred payment rather than just writing it off. If they're going to return to profitability, maybe they'll be able to pay it in the future. So maybe a little bit of skepticism there about, does it actually need to be written off? Can't the payment just be deferred? But again, like I said, don't spend too long here. You need to be efficient with your time. You just kind of want to grab enough points in each box, and then move on quickly. Get what you need and go. Don't spend too long trying to do everything. And I know it's tempting because you want to do a perfect report, but actually a perfect report is one which is balanced across all the requirements, not necessarily has every single point in it. But you can see here, with those number of points, again, would have got a clearly competent in each of those boxes as well. So of course, conclusions are quite straightforward here, because you just need to make sure you conclude on everything that the examiner / the client has asked for here. And you can see revenue for each product group and in total, cost of sales, gross profit for each product group and in total. So I like to have a point on everything. So revenue for each product group and in total. But you can see all I'm taking here, I've done revenue by each product group and in total here. I'm not going to put all of that in the conclusion. You just need the main point, and that's the key headline number. So I just take like the key headline number from each section. So I'm taking that key headline number from each section, maybe like a brief reason as to why it gone up or down. I'm not having all of my further analysis that I performed here in my context points. I'm not bringing all that in to the conclusions. It's a conclusion, so just concluding on the main number. So you can see here, nice and brief, just a number with the reason, but broad, I've covered everything. Overall, HBG, LBG, JP, and yeah, that was it. We won't ask for channel in the requirements. I haven't got that there. Cost of sales, I've just taken the overall number with the brief reason. But then for gross profit, I have done it by each product group because the requirement did specifically say. Usually on the marking key, it would just let you have one of the gross profit numbers. But because the requirements ask for it, I like to just make sure I've done exactly what I've been asked for, because I think the examiners would be well within their right to say that this does have to be by each product group, because that's what the requirement said. And then we've got here a point on the one-off issue as well. You'd absolutely need a point on that in the conclusion here, because that's asked for in the requirement. So you can see with the conclusions, they're brief and they're concise, and they just include the main points, but they address every area that was asked for in the requirement. So not in much detail on each area, but just brief and make sure I've covered everything. And then some recommendations. So of course we do have some recommendations we've thought about, of course, on the pro forma report, but make sure you just have ones which are really relevant to what's happened in the year. So I think it is useful to suggest have some further analysis. So profit analysis by product and licensor and jigsaw would be useful to identify which ones are the most profitable, and maybe focus on those a bit more. Revenue and profit analysis cut by retail client would be quite interesting to see. We've got some general numbers, haven't we, in the AI that certain clients are 10% or 8% or 3% of revenue. Then look at what's happened in the year. So HBG has done well, so focus on HBG perhaps, or maybe launch new expansion packs and special editions, because that's caused the growth there, and that was a real positive story in this mock exam. The Zincs hadn't done well, so actually maybe just tailor it slightly and say release expansion packs and special editions for Zincs, because that's the one which hadn't done so well there. Then we've got negotiate all licenses on an exclusive basis, because we've had the issue in the year. So we had the issue in the year with Mondo, of course, that not being on an exclusive basis, and therefore Hamlin released a game on it. Renew these licenses on more favourable terms. And then we've got cease using PZ as a supplier, because there's all those supply issues there. So you can kind of see how these points are really tailored to what's gone on in the year. So that expansion packs and special editions were the reason for the growth in Mucho and Lanfo. So therefore, expand it to the other game, which hasn't done as well. Negotiate the licenses on an exclusive basis. There was the issue, of course, with Hamlin releasing the Mondo game, so get everything on an exclusive basis. CH and Ringover have done well, and we know, from the AI that they, of course, are due to expire soon. So absolutely should look to renew those. And then for our exec summary, of course, as we know, a summary and a conclusion, are inherently, very similar. So of course, we know what's happened in the year. We know that overall revenue has gone up by this, and it's gone up by this, this, and this. These are the numbers. This is what's happened in the year. These are factual. So what it's going to be in a conclusion is the same as it's going to be in a summary as it's going to be in the main report, because these are just facts. Their revenue went up by 6.1%. Overall, HBG revenue went up by 12.8%. So therefore, because they're going to be the same in the conclusions as they will be in the exec summary, then as a starting point, you could copy your conclusions over into your exec summary, just so you've got the main numbers there, because this is going to be the same as this, because the numbers are the same. It's a fact that revenue went up by 6.1%. Even if you rewrite that from scratch, it's going to look exactly the same because the number's exactly the same and it's gone up. So you're going to say overall revenue has increased. I can't think of a different way you can write overall revenue has increased by 6.1%. Well, I mean, you could, but there's been a 6.1% increase in overall revenue, but you're saying the same thing. So as a starting point, you could copy your conclusions over, so you've got the main number. So this unhighlighted text is from the conclusions. So you could copy this over as a starting point, so you've got the main numbers in your conclusions, with the brief reason. But then what you need to do is you need to show a real skill here, because you then need to decide what other points should be in the exec summary. What else has happened, during the year? Because remember, in our conclusions, all we had was a number and a brief reason. Number and a brief reason, that's all we had in our conclusions. Of course, we had all these interesting further analysis points that we identified. We identified that volume was due to growth and a price increase per unit. We identified that LBG revenue would have gone down without CH. We've identified that revenue mix by channels continue to move online. So there's all these other points we've got in here. And our conclusions, they were kind of quite boring. They were just the brief headline number. They didn't have any of our interesting further analysis points in there. But what we can do for our exec summary is then bring some of those additional points into the exec summary, and they'll be worth some marks on the marking key. However, you can't bring too many in, because there's a mark here for it being an appropriate summary, which is essentially for your exec summary not being too long. So therefore, we have to be very kind of skillful here and selective in deciding which of these other points we want to bring into our exec summary. So what I suggest you do is you think about the points which are most significant. So is there been a particular product group that's performing particularly well or performing particularly poorly? Have there been significant changes in volume or average price per unit of a particular area? Has there been a significant change in the profit margins? Are there any cash issues? I'd probably add another point on the additional analysis, so in this case, a checkmate issue. So again, these are the things to think about. You're thinking about what are the most important points you'd want to bring to the attention of the director. So think firstly about which areas are the most important, like what's gone on in the year. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, well, there's been a dramatic increase in HBG. Are the directors going to be interested in this? Well, yes, absolutely. So therefore, I thought I'll probably add in an additional point where I've said this reverses the recent decline, because the directors were concerned about, or business as a whole, and presumably the directors were concerned about this major product group. The major product group was seeing a decline in revenue for its three main games, and that was kind of quite a significant issue facing the business, and they were going to do something to address that. And therefore, I think that's something that should be brought to the attention of the directors. What's something that is quite insignificant? Maybe that head office costs have gone down by 0.3%. It's just such a small issue. It's not of any significance, but this absolutely is. So we said that reverses the decline. We've pointed out as well that the other game is still performing badly. So again, with LBG, we've got the main point in our conclusions that it went up, the reason why. But actually, what else did we have in here is a further insight point, because this is definitely an area they should be concerned about with LBG. It's gone up slightly, but there was this kind of big decline here as well. So a bit of a mixed bag with LBG, and it hasn't performed as well as it has done in the past. So it was a further insight point we had here. We'll kind of flag into them, actually, without CH, it would have declined. So really, you've kind of got one licensor, which is kind of propping up this, big important, product group. So actually that wasn't in the conclusions, but I decided, that is really important because, like I said, that's propping up the whole product group. So without that, it would have declined. So I've added that in. And then JP, there wasn't that much else to say. And, like I said, you can't add an additional point on everything because it will get too long. But I think, the two main product groups, adding in an additional point about those, if there's something of significance and there's been like a significant change in those product groups, then yes, I would add something, in there. So maybe with gross profit, we had, the profit margin's gone up. It's a headline profit margin. That's an overall profit margin. That's absolutely like key focus for, directors. They're looking at overall revenue and like the main parts of revenue, by product group. They're looking at, the overall profit number, changes in the margins and, by the product group as well. They're probably not as interested in, as I've said, that, general admin costs have gone up by, if it's a small percentage. So again, I've added in a point about here, just saying that actually it started to recover despite, decline in margins being a wider industry issue. So just added in an extra point on that because I think this is a really significant area looking at overall gross profit. And it's a positive story as well that margin has increased. But then, similarly with LBG, and that's gone down, and that's really important as well. This is an area, of concern that, profit margin is declining. So I had the reason in the conclusions, but then I've added an additional point. It's concerning, it's unsustainable, and it continues to be the lowest margin product group. So the directors need to be aware of this. So there's something they could do about it. And then I've also added in a few additional points on the checkmate issue as well. So I just had like the headline number that they'd asked for. What's the impact on the management accounts? But then I've added in some additional points that I had in there that it looks as though there's an issue with other receivables as well. And actually, saving checkmate, it probably is the thing to do because it is quite a significant customer. And then in the recommendations, I've got the two main recommendations. So I thought quite carefully. I've got my recommendations here, but I thought quite carefully about which ones are the most important. And I just kind of felt here that handling issue is definitely a big issue. With the Mondo licensing. So get licenses on an exclusive basis so it doesn't happen again. PZ has been a problem in the past. It's caused a problem, this year. Jigsaw Puzzles has gone down because of it. Jigsaw Puzzles had done quite well before then. So cease using them as a supplier. And then a couple of recommendations on the one-off piece analysis. I'll stick to 3, maybe 4 as like an absolute maximum for the exec summary. And you can still see here it's an appropriate length. It's about, 2/3, between 2/3 and 3/4 of a page. It's not excessive. Some people have asked the question, some students, and I thought, why don't I just copy my whole requirement 1 in and I'll get all of these points except that one? Well, it's a risky game and it's not, in the spirit of, the exam. Certainly the examiners are not going to look kindly on that. And also, just to be, kind of completely blunt, if you haven't got one of these points in your answer, then you won't get whichever point you didn't get and this, and then you'll fail this box anyway. So you have to show a skill. I do appreciate that copying your conclusions as a starting point is an acceptable thing to do because you're just getting over your main point. You're just getting the numbers in there, which will be the same as the conclusions. So kind of doing that as a starting point, but then you have to carefully select which other points to have in there. And that's why you need to keep your conclusions nice and concise, because if your conclusions are too long, then you copy them over, it's going to be too long. You add in some extra points, it's far too long, and you're going to lose that point. So be concise with your conclusions, just have the main numbers that you need as per the requirement. You'll have that as your basis for your exec summary, and then you're adding in some additional points in there. So you could think of it as like conclusions plus, if you like. So again, I think fairly standard requirement 1. I don't think anything too unusual there. Obviously, it's different from mock exam 1, and it will be different from mock exam 3. But it's a technique that you need to really get the hang of here. It could look different on exam day. Mock exam 1 look different from mock exam 2, which will look different from mock exam 3. So you need to kind of think quite carefully about which sections you're going to have, which areas you're going to focus on, based on what the requirement has asked for, and what information you're given on the exam paper and which numbers have moved most significantly, and just think about what the marking key looks like, and that's going to kind of really help you decide how to weight your answer. And then you've just apply the exam technique that we've worked on throughout the course, and making sure that you don't have too much analysis, and make sure that you finish requirement 1 on time. That is so important, because if you overrun, you won't feel it now. You won't feel the consequence of overrunning now, but you will feel it when we get on to requirement 2 and 3. There's a lot to do there, sensitivity analysis as well, the assumptions, there's lots of additional kind of financial, operational, strategic points to include, ethics. There's just so much to do in those requirements. You just need a certain amount of time. You need the allotted time. It doesn't matter how good you are at it. It takes a certain amount of time to type those points, to read through the exam paper information. It is impossible to do those requirements without sufficient time. So therefore, it's crucial that you stick to time on requirement 1.